It is 5:22 and currently sitting at 3 degrees. This is Toronto's breaking news, CP24. Tomorrow marks the 40th anniversary of a legendary Toronto radio program that showcased rap and hip-hop in the GTA. But more of that after the break.
In 1983, Ron Nelson launched the Fantastic Voyage radio program on CKLN 88.1 FM and helped popularize Toronto's hip-hop community every Saturday afternoon. The legendary show provided a platform for Toronto's early hip-hop artists and concerts and helped expose new genres to fans across the GTA. As part of Black History Month, the Toronto Public Library is hosting an interview with Nelson to mark the 40th anniversary of Fantastic Voyage on Monday. And for more, I'm joined by the man himself, Ron Nelson, Canadian pioneer, broadcaster, and promoter. Thanks so much for joining us this afternoon.
Thank you, Scott. Glad to be here.
Yeah, I want to start off by asking you what it means to be honored like this by the City of Toronto for Black History Month to recognize your contribution to the Canadian music scene.
Well, first and foremost, I think it's great to be Black and to be in a position where you can be any kind of a role model for, kids growing up, because, any minority can kind of understand how it goes with that whole situation there, being Black in Toronto. It's tough, so I'm honored very much. It's been overwhelming, to tell the truth. I really didn't know along the way that I was doing anything significant. I was just doing what I loved, you know what I mean? So it's nice that, 40 years later, it's kind of turned around and I'm getting a little love for what I've done.
Yeah, so take us back. 40 years ago, why start the show and what was the initial reaction?
Well, I was a Ryerson student. It was my first day at Ryerson, and I applied to the community radio station there, and they gave me a job, and I got an opportunity to play music that wasn't really en vogue at the time. It was 1983, so there was a lot of new wave and pop and rock, and disco had just died, but there's this little thing called hip hop that was creeping up in the underground, and a lot of people in our Toronto community were relating to this music, but there wasn't an umbrella for it. So when I got that job in CKLN and started playing hip hop music, it kind of turned me from a nobody to a somebody, because it became kind of like a magnet for anybody who had hip hop in their heart and soul to kind of relate to and feel a sense of hope and to see a future, to have a vision for the music going somewhere.
And initially, over the first couple months, first years, was there a huge groundswell already? Were there a lot of people that were really into the music and happy that there was finally a place where they can hear it at one time every week? Or did it take a while to connect?
Well, at that point in time, the music was kind of against the odds. People didn't have a lot of faith in hip hop. They thought it was going to dilute and die at the same way disco did. It was just another form of Black music that people were more or less experimenting with, but it was a little hardcore and a little radical. So in the end, it was a good thing that, it came through and made some noise. And in the end, yeah, it was kind of great that I was able to play a role and do my own little part, because it was a North American movement and eventually a whole worldwide movement. It came from many communities that were, against the odds, and they kind of needed to get out, and hip hop was a way to express and be understood by the rest of the world and stuff like that. So, I was glad just to play my little part in the whole thing, man. I'm quite fortunate.
Yeah, you just all you had to do was just play some really good music. And when you first started bringing some of those big name artists from the U.S., names like Run DMC, EPMD, Public Enemy, was there a lot of interest right away on this side of the border? Did a lot of people know these acts already? And how did that help grow the hip-hop community on this side of the border with those already established big name artists?
Well, these artists were kind of only known to the underground communities. Like I said, the people in Regent and Flemington and Jane and Finch and Scarborough, like a lot of the West Indian, Canadian Black populations. We were into the music first before the Caucasian population started embracing it for themselves. So if you're really in touch with what was going on in the musical underground, then you know a little about hip hop music, or maybe it was punk rock music or new wave, because both music were popular at the time. But it wasn't a choice after a while, because I hosted a radio show that played that music. the audience that was there became very demanding and almost aggressive in saying, Ron, you have to bring these artists to town, because they hadn't seen these artists. You could only hear about them and dream about New York and dream about one day being an artist yourself. So it's a natural evolution for me. I started bringing these artists to town, and it made, again, Canadian artists a little more fortified, believing that, you know, if they can do it, then we can do it too. Canada is like a very close neighbor to America, so it only made sense. It takes an hour and a half to drive to Buffalo and get some of that American experience and some of that American culture. You drive a little longer, you can be in New York and see the whole thing. And once you go there, it's like you're magnetized, you're hooked, you're addicted. Hip hop has always been very addictive music.
Yeah, and you talked about Canadian artists there and getting the exposure that they were desperate for. You've helped countless Canadian artists over the years. Why was it important for you to give them that airtime?
I think it's just, I call myself a talent spotter. You know, I'm kind of impressed whenever I see talent, especially Black talent. I just want to promote it. It's an instinct. You know what I mean? It's just something that comes naturally. And I saw what was going on with a lot of these artists not having a place to go with their talent. Again, in 1983, there was no infrastructure. It's not like today where there are record labels and people of color working labels who understand the music because they've been on the streets. We used to have men in suits and ties, you know, who read about the music and kind of, you know, and kind of admired it, but they didn't live it, so they didn't understand how to market it. And that goes for record labels, pressing plants, graphic design artists, engineers, studios. There was no expertise, no infrastructure. So a lot of those artists that were talented, they became ghosts because they got older now. Later on, of course, people like Drake were born, and the path, as I keep telling people, the reason that we give credit to the pioneers that were back there on the old school who don't get credit today is because we helped create that path so that the artists of today who are living now, who are young and fresh now, can have an opportunity to actually make it, because the infrastructure is a lot stronger now than it was before, and the signs are all over the place. And Canada's hot, Scott. Canada's hot right now.
Oh, yeah. And Ron, I got to say, as a kid growing up in Toronto, I'm of the era that Maestro Fresh West was on constant repeat on my Walkman as I was taking the TTC everywhere as a teenager. So that's my era. That's my genre. So I guess I have you to thank for part of that.
For part of that. Maestro and Farley and everyone. I mean, Ivan Berry. There's a lot of godfathers of this whole scene that help move the music, and you know, we're grateful to everyone who played their part. All the artists, whether you know you made it or not, if you've ever been on a stage, you understand that experience will live with you for the rest of your life. So, you know, I'm unselfish, man. Like I said, when I was on the radio, I played everybody's stuff. It was mostly cassettes at first before we got into CDs and stuff, but you got to give people an opportunity so that they can kind of believe in themselves, so they can kind of, you know, take another step forward and have a scene. But if you close doors to Canadian artists, there's not going to be a scene. They need to have the experience of not just recording music, but getting on a stage and performing it, and then touring and everything else that goes with it.
All right, Ron Nelson, congratulations on 40 years of Fantastic Voyage, and thanks so much for chatting with us this afternoon.
Thanks for having me.
Appreciate it.
As part of Black History Month, Toronto Public Library is celebrating the legacy of a DJ who created an influential Toronto hip-hop radio program. Ron Nelson launched the Fantastic Voyage radio program on community radio station CKLN 88.1 FM in 1983. The legendary show provided a platform for Toronto's early hip-hop artists and concerts, and helped expose new genres to fans across the region. Toronto Public Library is hosting an interview with Nelson to mark the 40th anniversary of Fantastic Voyage tomorrow. There was no expertise, no infrastructure, so a lot of those artists that were talented, they became ghosts because they got older now. Later on, of course, people like Drake were born, and the path, as I keep telling people, the reason that we give credit to the pioneers that were back there on the old school who don't get credit today is because we helped create that path so that the artists of today who are living now, who are young and fresh now, can have an opportunity to actually make it, because the infrastructure is a lot stronger now than it was before, and the signs are all over the place. The event starts tomorrow at 7 p.m. at the Toronto Reference Library near Bloor and Yonge. There's a new #1 at the box office for the first time.